So guys, hi. Today I'm going to speak with Karin Fast. She is a senior lecturer in Media and Communication Studies at the Department of Geography, Media and Communication in Karlstad University here in Sweden. Nowadays, her research area is around mediatization, media work, transmedia, and geomedia. So I'm really pleased to receive her. Please check this interview because it was really great. Thank you so much for your time to talk to me. I'm very excited for this moment of sharing. And well, say hello to people that are watching.
Yes. Thank you. And thank you for having me for this interview, Anna.
Yes, it's my pleasure. Okay, Karin, these questions are mostly about your own PhD dissertation, which I read, and I am very thankful for your work because it's really well written, and it was really helpful for me personally for my PhD dissertation. So here's my thank you, and just so you know that somebody read it.
Yeah, that's always good to know.
Yeah, I think everybody that do a PhD dissertation, we are always worried if it will be useful for somebody other than ourselves.
Yeah.
So it was.
I'm glad to hear that it was.
Okay, so my first question is from 2012 to now, what are the main differences that you could notice in the creation or maintenance chain of transmedial/brand words such as transforms, which was the one that you researched?
Well, with the risk of making you disappointed, I pretty much abandoned transmedia in relation to pop culture after I finished my dissertation. I guess I was a bit tired of that area at that point in time. So I haven't done any other cases than transformers, at least not in the rigorous sense that I did in my PhD thesis. However, I have brought the concept of transmedia with me, and I have spent quite a lot of time trying to make sense of that concept outside of the sphere of entertainment and pop culture. So, and what I argue in a book together with Andre Jansson that we published in 2009 on transmedia work, we claim that the notion of transmedia, it's no longer simply relevant for pop culture or the sphere of entertainment, and not even for simply content production per se, but it has a much wider relevance in today's society. So even though I don't study franchises anymore in that sense, at least not now, I might pick it up again. I have continued working with the notion of transmediality and transmedia technologies and transmediatization, which we also write of in our book. So I have quite little to say about the development in relation to pop culture specifically, really. But if you want me to elaborate on my new take on the concept, what we argue in our book and elsewhere also is that transmedia has really established as a new regime of mediatization. It's becoming an increasingly normalized mode of circulation as opposed to mass media, which was very much, well, texts were more fixed and more contained and more adjusted to a specific medium, for example. Whereas in this age of transmedia or regime of transmedia, it's calculated already from the start that this text and these consumers who are our targets for these texts, they are supposed to move. They are supposed to move between platforms. So that is already predicted and expected. And so the whole text is adjusted according to this transmedia logic, if you would. And this also means that what we sometimes refer to as fan participation or fan labor or co-production or collaboration or whatever you want to call it, that's also something that is expected in many more realms today than just in relation to fan fiction or fictional narratives. It's something that we as ordinary consumers and as workers and as parents, citizens living in smart cities are increasingly expected to do. So, so we have really moved the concept of transmedia out of its specific location from the start and made it into a framework that we hope can explain wider developments in society.
Yeah, that's really interesting. And it relates very well to the idea of media life from Deus, right? I mean, yes. It's everywhere. And you know, that's one of the things that I find it's one of the trickiest things within the transmedia studies, because it is, like you said, something that it's you know, it develops around entertainment, but got bigger than that. And it is becoming how we communicate and how we relate to media, how we relate to contents of all sorts. And I started to wonder, hearing you speak, how it will be in like 10 years from now, because I believe that it will be communication. Like, we won't speak anymore about transmedia. We will speak about communication, or this is how we communicate. This is how we search for things, and etc. So I find it really amazing and interesting, this intake that you have.
Yeah, and I should also say that, I mean, the kind of when we, for example, write about transmedia technologies in our book and elsewhere, we're not saying that, well, on the one hand, it is a specific form of technology, but it's connective digital media, which we really imply when we talk about transmedia technologies. And as such, we could call them just connective digital media. When we add the trends, it's really just to also stress this boundary crossing affordances that these technologies have. So it's a way of labeling what we in this particular study or in this particular empirical context understand as the most significant aspect that can explain, for example, why we work the way we do, why we use the kind of technologies we do when we work or travel, or whatever the context is that we are exploring. So, as you know, also elsewhere, I have written about geomedia and geomediatization. And basically, again, I think that, well, our smartphone, for example, it's both a transmedium and a geomedium, so to speak. But depending on which affordances we want to stress in a particular analysis, for example, then we might change this prefix before media, and I think that serves a very good purpose.
Interesting. Yeah, that actually connects with my third question, which I will make it secondly, because I think it has to do with it. It's by your work with Geomídia, what are the most important points of traction or distancing between those studies and transmediality? I guess the first one you already said. I mean, it's the use of the media term with you know, like a suffix.
Yes, so it's this a really interesting question, and I should say that so far I haven't really put them both into one paper, conceptual paper, trying to describe how they connect or where they diverge. But again, I think that firstly, I would say that they have so much in common, the notion of transmedia and geomedia. They are premised on digitalization first and foremost, and they thus really accelerated the development of geomediatization or transmediatization. Both of those processes really took accelerated in the mid 1990s, and especially increased in speed with datafication. So they overlap in terms of time period. They both rely on the digital. They both rely on connectivity. And they are both, I would also say, speaking about media life, which you added to the conversation, Mark Dö's notion of media life, which I really also see how it connects here. I think that what is beneficial with that concept is how, well, Dö's argues that in media life, the media becomes so normal, so ordinary, that it disappears before our eyes. So which in turn makes it very hard to problematize and criticize media, because we cannot really grasp the way in which we interact with media on a daily basis. And I think that both transmedia and geomedia to great extents point to quite obscure, invisibilized processes that we are not always aware about. But then I think that what you, for example, do in your study and what I did in relation to transformers, when really looking for those processes and changes in relation to a specific, quite spectacular environment or brand, in our cases, we get to see them. They become obvious to us. I think it's much harder in everyday life to really get hold of them. But that's why I think it's an important practice to do what you do when you really try to, within a limited context, look for how transmedia or geomedia develop. So I think that has a great value in those kinds of studies. Again, as I said, I use transmedia to really stress the liquidity, the spillover effects, the ways in which texts and practices go from one platform to another. And I use geo in geomedia to speak to the fact that these technologies always also communicate with place or space and take cues from our physical location and processes that data and potentially deliver a different kind of experience to us, modifying content. To take the obvious example of getting a restaurant recommendation depending on where you are in the city. So where you, what kind of recommendation you will get depend on your physical location. At the same time, your physical location being in a restaurant might depend on what you just used your media for. So it's really this two-way communication between location and media. So that's how the geo comes into.
There are some authors from transmedia studies that talk about situated transmedia. They use some of the ideas that we, and I include myself in it, that we are using when we relate to geomedia. And it's really interesting because it is, I would say, and maybe I don't know if I am being naive to say that, but maybe it's the first time that we are actually discussing space in transmedia studies. You know, because one of the things that it has been like a personal struggle for me was to start this movement of looking to space through transmedia, or and vice versa, like trying to understand the relations that maybe transmediality could have by building a space, or even if this space is an online space. On my master's, I analyzed a augmented reality app called Our Leader, the Mockingjay. It was part of the transmedia world of Hunger Games. And one of the things that was more interesting about this is because they built like a mirror of the city inside of the cell phone. So you saw the same city that you would see it with your eyes, but the difference was that people that used the app could leave stencils and graffiti in the city, like joining this movement, this rebel movement that was happening in Hunger Games in the movies. So it was something that was very interesting in my opinion, because it re-signified the city, and at the same time it was bringing the narrative aspect of the Hunger Games to something more real in the sense that it was in the city, you know. So it would be like an between space between what was of the Hunger Games and what was from the city itself. So after that, I mean, there was Pokemon Go. There was like this huge thing. I don't know if it was in here in Sweden, but in Brazil, people would meet in squares to play along and to get Pokemons and stuff. And it is related, you know, it is in this between place, this space of a narrative, transmedia world and reality in our city and etc. So this is something that I'm very glad to be seeing, you know, gaining shape within transmedia studies.
Yeah, and I think, as you say, I agree, even though I haven't really been reading a lot of transmedia storytelling literature recently, I feel right in identifying this gap, because for a long time, at least, when we talk about place or space geographies in relation to transmedia storytelling and transmedia entertainment, we really just meant these worlds that were built, the fictional worlds and their geographies, and spent quite a lot of time trying to explore and investigate those, but not the connections between those and sort of physical places or the city places that you talk about here. So and again, just this is a spontaneous reaction to what you said, but I think that media geography studies overall can have something to learn through that kind of study as well, because here we can really see how someone has given it a deep thought about how we are going to move a story from online to a specific physical context. And that's how a lot of companies, a lot of producers, a lot of, well, not only that, but also municipalities and yeah, in terms of city branding, a lot of agents think along those lines. And that's how ultimately the smart city, if you want to use that concept, comes into play. So by looking at it in specific contexts, we can learn a lot, I think.
Yeah, I agree with you.
Exciting.
And that's interesting. Well, it's related to my second question, which became the third question. How do you see the relationship of producer-user reverberating in our everyday life media experience? I guess it kind of, you know, connects to.
Yeah, that's a big question.
Yeah.
But I can, if I start again in my thesis work, which you were interested in, and how I approached this Transformers universe, I really thought it was important to have a balanced account of the interplay between producers and consumers or fans. And even though I was very interested in how, for example, the producers went about to engage consumers or fans in marketing campaigns, or in other ways made use of fans and consumers, even though that was a very big concern for me, I still wanted to talk to fans. I wanted to read a lot of fan fora communication to really try to understand what's in it for the fans. So therefore, I think that I have quite a fair understanding of what also the consumers get out of it, what the fans get out of it, the kinds of pleasure and even points of resistance that they could make manifest in relation to the producers of Transformers, such as Hasbro or Paramount Pictures, which produced the movies, for example, and DreamWorks, and a lot of agents, as you know, were involved. But then I think it's always hard to neglect the fact that the space of action for consumers is still very limited, and the producers, the brand owners, they always have the right to claim copyright infringement, for example, and to really put an end to fan actions that they feel destroy or in any way damage the brand. So ultimately, I still have this view, I suppose, that there is only so much you can do as a fan and as a consumer, and I keep the conviction that I had also when I started investigated this convergence culture or participatory culture, that I was a bit hesitant to really call it participation or co-creation or those kinds of more positive labels, because I think that, well, it takes quite a lot for it to be an actual participation or to be real co-creation. And that to me means something else than just, you know, acting within the frames of a specific marketing campaign and being able to do only this much of what you really want to do with your favorite brand. And but what I wasn't paying that much attention to in my thesis, given that it was quite a long time ago now since I started it, that was even before the advent of social media when I started in this dissertation, is I didn't really account for the power of third parties or social media platforms in the creation of or only indirectly, not to a great extent. And I think if we look at it to now, the relationship between various producers of entertainment or media content generally, we see also in my current research, I can also see how more traditional media companies or content producers, they claim that they are relatively powerless relative to Facebook or Google or the really big players. So I think, but then also again, I think we should always be a bit skeptical when some really big media players claim that they are being powerless or that consumers are suddenly taking power at their expense, because that's, I mean, this is part, you could say, of this whole sovereign consumer discourse that a lot of companies use to also avoid regulation and
and I think with social media we are in phase of a phenomenon of loss of the authorship. Like there are a lot of fan movements, fan theories, fan discussions that the companies, the brands, they take that, they use as official, and they don't give it credit because the authorship of that got lost in the sea of how people already got that and did something else with that. So that's really interesting, what you said. And I guess I would say it's like a reverberation of how this media life is in the construction of our relationship with brands and, you know, companies in general. We want also to have power over them. You know, I guess it's something that we have always wanted. I mean, reading your thesis, I could see that you thought a little bit about that, at least when you say that this place of this construction is exploitation, it's pleasure, but it's also conflict, it's also discussion. So.
And I think it's also important to keep in mind that it can be both pleasurable and exploitation of user data, for example. It's no contradiction between the two. As a fan, I wouldn't be engaged if I didn't get anything out of it, and I could even agree to take that sort of transactional cost. I can agree to give up some of my content that I produced for Facebook, or some fan fiction that I just completed, or I can give up my personal data because I get a very exciting, thrilling experience for that. Again, we need to see that it can be both at the same time, and of course it's and without that enthusiasm, without that engagement, there wouldn't be that much to exploit either. So of course it's a circle process, sort of. But I think also in relation to how I started out with with my theoretical framework for my thesis, I was so inspired on the one hand when I read Henry Jenkins' work. I mean, he meant so much for making us aware of transmedia storytelling and these new phenomena surfacing. But on the other hand, he also got a lot of critique, some unfair critique even, perhaps, for being very celebratory and optimistic and romantic, this fan participation and everything. And I think even though I can also see that, I can see that enthusiasm, I can see that kind of agency within its frames, I think as media scholars, it's also our job to, there are so many voices celebrating, again, the sovereign consumer power, participation, and all of this. As media scholars, as critical media scholars, it's our job to show the other side of the coin.
And to discuss about it in a sense of trying to learn something of these processes, so we can maybe suggest other kinds of processes, of other kinds of understanding. I guess one of the things that made me want to study Disney was that, because it is a hegemonic approach, a hegemonic idea of media. They own a lot of other brands. They do a lot of stuff, and they are responsible for almost 100 years of pop culture. So I believe that understanding how it operates and how we relate to that, we can maybe use this information to think of other processes. There are from maybe a political vibe, an economic vibe that tries to do something else with this format, with these tools, you know. So I think so. I think other than just like say that Disney is bad, or that it is dominating the world, or whatever, we can learn from that and use that to do something else, you know. I really believe that.
Yes, yeah, but that's a good approach, I think.
Yeah. So, well, you said that it's been a while since you have been studying around pop culture, and I understand that. But I believe that you have been maybe thinking or seeing something, and maybe not in a sense of studying it deeply, but maybe following some franchise that you like, or and I'd like to ask you, how do you evaluate the sustainability of this format of franchise, or of building this huge world where narratives are related, characters are related, merchandising, and etc. How do you understand its sustainability? And it can be in how you understand sustainability. You don't need to relate to any you don't need to relate to any kind of conceptualization of sustainability.
No, but you're right to point out that I haven't really followed any new franchise closely, so you should
be aware.
Be aware of what I say now. And also it's the fact that while I wrote my thesis, I had small kids. Which gave me automatically insights into new franchises, and every time I visited the toy store or sat with them in the sofa watching some new series or movie, that was a way of getting a glimpse into a franchise, and I don't get that automatically anymore. So that's a bit unfortunate. So I probably miss a lot of exciting things going on out there, and new innovative ways of developing franchises and working with transmediality. But I've been involved in a music project, or a couple of music projects lately. So maybe in that context, I could say something about some cases that I have seen where speaking about combining the affordances of transmedia and the affordances of geomedia. So we see, I think, a lot of music marketing campaigns, for example, or music franchises that employ not only transmedia and various forms of transmedia marketing or transmedia storytelling, but also geomedia, in the sense that you talked about, of transporting, in this case, a music experience from online to also a physical location. So I know that, for example, there is a Swedish alternative band talking about also more progressive kinds of smaller production companies, sort of. They are an independent alternative music band who also has a very big interest in sustainability from an environmental point of view. So they care very much about climate change and work in favor of climate awareness and things like that. So what they did, for example, when they launched a new album a few years ago, they launched it as an app on your smartphone, but to be able to listen to the songs on the app, you had to go out in the forest. You have to be on a specific place for the app to play. And they got a lot of attention for that. Rolling Stone magazine, for example, wrote about them, this small local or regional band from where I am now in Finland, or outside of Karlstad. So, and maybe that's a trend that we will see even more of, and I think we already do in relation to pop culture more generally also, that the affordances of geomedia and transmedia are really combined to their maximum to really make transmedia experiences also about spatial experiences. So I think that your project is spot on. That's when I were engaged in this music project, we also looked at different marketing campaigns to see how they employed transmedia and geomedia. And another trend is to, or it has been around for years now, but it's also, I think, something that develops along with technology. For example, there are all kinds of ticket that you're supposed to find a ticket somewhere located, and by moving around and finding this location, you get the chance of competing for tickets, for example, or but those kinds of treasure haunts, they commonly start online, but they end up being somewhere out there.
Yeah. I mean, if you think of Charlie and the Chocolate Factory, there was already
exactly.
this.
Exactly. So that's the blueprint.
Yeah. I think those processes of combining transmedia and city are very related to arts, alternative reality games, and also I think with gamification in general. I mean, back in Brazil, I work in a company. I'm the owner, actually, with two friends that we develop transmedia projects. And we are focused on 3 points of transmediality, which is the project itself. So the concept of the project and how it is connected with the medias, and how do we connect it to media. And I always get some kind of intertwinedness between offline and online, especially around city and stuff. And I have a friend, my partner in the company, he is a game designer. So he is like always thinking about that. And I found that it's easier when you insert some kind of gamification in some process around this. It makes it more pleasurable, and also it makes it more tangible, because when you gamify something, you insert some elements that make it look like a game, even when it's not exactly a game,
Yes.
So it's really interesting how those three actually are connected, games, city, and transmediality. Yeah.
And I think, again, when talking about gamification, I think that what's interesting in studying the marketing practice and art practice is that they are always quite innovative. They may rest on old conventions in terms of beauty and all those kinds of quite conservative. They repeat those kinds of ideologies, but in terms of technology and in terms of finding new ways to engage audiences and consumers, they find it. And so they are at the forefront many times. And so that's why I think it's quite worthwhile to always keep at least one eye in. When talking about gamification as well, I mean, we see it in the university, we see it in all kinds of places in society where gamification logics are also applied to make us more engaged as workers also. So
do you know something that is very interesting in this circle of relations, let's say like that, is that in the end, everything goes back to structural issues that we need to address, maybe to do some changes. While I was developing this idea of unsustainable transmedia, what I've been noticing is that even though we are like upfront in matters of how to use the things that we have in our hands to use, we are very innovative in that, we are creative in that, we have people engaging to that. We still don't address or maybe address superficially some very important issues. This thing about us being separate from nature, for example, especially in Western. I mean, we understand ourselves as being separate beings of the nature, and by thinking about that, we never actually talk about this. We don't do something transmedialically speaking or geometrically speaking to try to address that, at least not in a mainstream sense. But we have creativity enough
Yeah.
do so. Why don't we do?
Yeah. And I'm sure also that there are so many, many times when we talk about transmedia, we insert it into this very commercialized context with the big producers and
Yeah.
where big money is. But I think that also a lot of grassroots initiatives and progressive movements also apply pretty much the same techniques for creating awareness for different questions like you also describe. So also worthwhile to look into more than one context. I think that's starting to happen also in the field of research.
There is a recent book from Donna Hancock's from Australia that she exactly points on that thing, like how can we use transmediality and place to understand or to revolutionize, I don't know if that's a word, to make something different of this oriented, profit-oriented Western white male version that we have of almost every media content, at least in mainstream area. So I'd like to suggest you to
I haven't read it, so thank you for
I hope you like it. Well, that's all my questions. Would you like to comment on something or add something that you find it interesting or important?
No, I just want to thank you for posing such interesting question that also got me thinking about two of my main interests and how they interest in new ways that I hadn't before. So
well, thank you. I mean, everything that we have discussed was very interesting. I mean, I am like thinking about
I'm glad to hear that.
to approach that. So well, if it's okay, I'm going to stop recording and you can say bye to the people.
Bye, and thank you for watching.